Hi there. Welcome back to another episode of the Life, Liberty, and Pursuit of Happiness Project podcast. I'm really grateful that you've taken the time to join me today. I'm Garrett, the founder of the Life, Liberty, and Pursuit of Happiness Project and host of this podcast. Today, I want to talk about another study that I came across. And this one's from the University of Pennsylvania. And this is another write-up from that I found on phys.org. Again, that's phys.org. Which is a science website based out of the UK that I really appreciate. That I recently discovered has a whole lot of not just interesting science stuff, but also worthy stuff about preparedness. So love it even more now. But this study, this write-up here, is focused more specifically originally on businesses. And businesses are totally legit. Businesses need to be prepared just like individuals and families do. As a side note, I do offer preparedness consulting for businesses. That's for small businesses and those who are in the human services field. So businesses that support people with disabilities or elderly individuals or that kind of thing, as well as small businesses. So just a little plug there for my consulting services. But like I said, this is originally written more from a perspective of looking at business preparedness. But as with many things in life, the principles and the things it talks about are applicable to individuals and families. So I felt this was worthwhile to talk about, and I hope that you feel the same way. Anything that I bring to you, I really have the goal of it being worthwhile for you, because I know that when you spend the time to listen to this podcast, whether you're listening to it on a regular podcast or whether you're watching it on YouTube, it's appropriate to say you're spending time doing it, because time is a resource and it's valuable. And so I appreciate when you take the time to join me. And I want to make sure that that is valuable to you. So what this article talks about is the problem that people have where they know that preparedness is important. They know disasters or emergencies are a legitimate thing, that they are realistic in the likelihood of them happening, and yet they don't prepare. And so Wharton marketing professor emeritus George Day and global marketing consultant Roger Dennis called this the paradox of preparedness. So again, the paradox of preparedness is simply that we know things are likely going to happen. We know it's important to prepare, but because we don't know exactly when those things are going to happen, we tend to procrastinate getting ready for them. We tend to not take preparedness as seriously or do what we could in a timely manner or as efficiently or urgently as we could if we had like a specific deadline, a specific date that we were needing to be prepared by. That's why in our own preparedness efforts, goal setting is super important. We need to set a goal, and that goal can be flexible because life happens. We need to adjust sometimes goals even based on just new information that we have. But setting a goal will help you be prepared. And that's one of the things that we do in the Life, Liberty, and Pursuit of Happiness Preparedness Coaching Program, which will be debuting soon. We're going to set goals. I'm going to help you go from not really prepared or not prepared at all to being prepared at a legitimate level. The paradox of preparedness happens largely because there is no deadline. There's no alarm as far as here's when this is happening. The alarm is this is going to happen, but because that's kind of vague, people don't take it as seriously. People procrastinate. People are cautious, overly cautious. They don't feel as compelled to get ready in an urgent manner. And urgent doesn't mean rushed or panicked or anything like that, but urgent means you're taking it seriously and making it a priority. Historically, they went back to New Zealand, and I mean, historically, we're talking like the last 10 years. So a couple of companies in New Zealand looked at recent history to when they were starting to look at this. And they looked at the SARS epidemic and Ebola epidemic. So Ebola, if you don't know, is a really nasty disease that is mostly in Africa. It has spread outside of Africa a little bit, a couple times, but primarily in certain regions in Africa. But it's a really horrible disease. Basically where you, one of the big things is just horrific bleeding. Bleeding from your eyes and ears and mouth, and just it's a hemorrhaging disease, and so it's gross, and it has a really high fatality rate, and it's also unfortunately rather easily transmissible. The other SARS, for those of you who are younger, may not remember SARS. SARS is, can't remember what the S and the A stand for in SARS off the top of my head, but it's a respiratory syndrome. It's similar to, in some ways, to the cold. It's in that same family of diseases. It's a coronavirus. So it was kind of like the coronavirus before the COVID-19 coronavirus. That was, gosh, early 2000s. Both of those were things that caused a lot of concern. Ebola still does. There's breakouts every so often. And so these companies looked at the outbreaks that happened and kind of said, you know what, I don't know how prepared as a country we are here in New Zealand. And so they commissioned a study, and credit to those individual companies for doing that. I don't remember, I don't think their actual names of the companies were in the article, but if you are those companies, I totally give you credit. I appreciate and applaud individuals and private businesses taking the initiative to fund studies and spread the word and that sort of thing to further worthy causes such as the cause of preparedness. So during this project, they interviewed a lot of senior government officials, supply chain experts. That's one of the, because there were businesses, that was one of the things they focused on, was the supply chain. And they found that they really were not prepared as a country for supply chain issues, and that was borne out when we had the COVID-19 crisis, because unfortunately people did not take it seriously. New Zealand had not experienced a pandemic, not recently at least, and Ebola being in Africa, makes it seem so far away. And so it was difficult for people to take those things seriously. They referred to the pandemic as a gray swan event, which is a term I don't think I'd heard before, but I find interesting. So black swan events, if you've heard of those are the more common, that's the more common term. Black swan events are entirely unpredictable, like catastrophic things that happen. Gray swan events, they defined as things that are well known, things that are likely or possible, but still extremely damaging. And so because the threat or risk is known, and they're legitimately possible, there are things that we can prepare for. But unfortunately, people often don't, because people don't know when it's going to happen. And mostly you're looking at statistics, and generally statistics are going to say, it's got a probability of X happening in the next so many years. People look at that and go, oh, yeah, well, no big deal. Even a Cascadia earthquake that I've talked about before. We're totally in that range where one could happen, but looking at the next 50 years, it's like I don't remember, 7 to 12% chance, something like that, of it happening. Don't quote me on those numbers, but it's around a 10% chance of it happening within the next 50 years. And so people hear that and they're like, oh, no big deal. Only a 10% chance, sometime in the next 50 years, I'll be dead by then. No big deal. I don't have to worry about it. And that's really what happens. That's the paradox of preparedness right there. When it comes to preparedness, it's something that we have to persuade people to do. And part of that's through education. That's part of why I do this podcast for you. But they identified in this study, they identified they identified 2 problems, and then they identified 4 things that we can do to overcome those problems. And so the first problems are the difficulties of getting and keeping attention. Everybody has only so much capacity to give attention. There's only so much attention to go around, and it's easy to get oversaturated with information as well. And people tend to focus on what's immediately important and to them. So they tend to focus on what affects them directly and what is going to happen in the immediate future. And so people tend to believe, even if something happens, even if there is a disaster, it's not going to affect me, probably, maybe, and it's not necessarily going to be in the next few years. It's down the road somewhere. And so people tend not to give as much attention to preparedness because of that. So one of the solutions principles is that attention has to be earned. So the first is that attention is a scarce resource, which is kind of what I just talked about. There's only so much attention that we have. And the other is that attention has to be earned. So, as parents, people often, have to tell the kids, or even teachers, or, kids have to be reminded, hey, pay attention to me, pay attention to this. You need to listen. Happens as adults too, but more so with kids. But if you have a good knowledge of something, then you have more authority, and so it's easier for people to take you seriously and listen to you. There's 4 things that you can do to help earn and encourage people to give attention to an issue. And so again, adapting these slightly for personal level instead of business, but principles are the same. So that's what I love about principles. They're the same in every situation, even though every situation is different. So the first principle is to start by learning from experience. Things that happened in the past aren't necessarily going to happen in the exact same way, but we've all heard that history repeats itself, and that's legit. And so they shared the anecdote of Toyota after the Fukushima earthquake in 2011. When that happened, the earthquake and tsunami really disrupted the supply chain in Japan. And so Toyota had a lot of problems with meeting their obligations for manufacturing and output of vehicles and other things. And so they learned from that to protect their supply chain. I won't go into all the steps they did to take to do that, because that's not as relevant. But they learned to protect their supply chain. And so when the COVID-19 pandemic happened or started, because I guess technically it's still happening, comparatively, Ford and GM were operating at only about 62% of their production capacity in the first half of 2021. So not great. That's a lot of missed opportunity for manufacturing output and sales of vehicles. So that's people who missed out on new cars, and that's missed income for the business. But because Toyota had learned to protect their supply chain, they were able to operate at a 92% capacity, which is a huge difference. So because they saw what happened in the past, they proactively made changes, and that had a huge benefit for them when the next disaster happened. The second principle is to stay alert to anomalies. So anomalies, aren't like super clearly indicative. An anomaly is something that's just out of the ordinary, something that's odd or off. And so it's a blip or a glitch, if you want to use a more technical term. Doesn't necessarily indicate like X is going to happen on Y date, but it can give you an idea of, hey, something's going on here that I need to look at. If we pay attention to those anomalies, we have an idea of, okay, we need to pay attention here. Look at what the anomaly is, what's going on. You can look at things. The example they showed was Intuit, the company that makes TurboTax. They had put out a money management service called Mint. And then there was people weren't using it like they had originally intended at Intuit. And so what they realized by looking at what was going on, they're like, okay, this is different. This is an anomaly. We're not quite sure what's going on here. So they looked at it, looked more closely, and realized most people were using their Mint product to manage their business income for solopreneurs and people who are self-employed, who are part of the gig economy, that sort of thing. And so they realized, okay, this is telling us that there's a need in this area. And so they were able to put out a variant of QuickBooks that is geared towards those people. And so that became their fastest growing product after they did that. So again, they looked at the signals, they saw the anomalies, they kind of figured out what was going on to best of their ability, and they were able to act on that. The third principle is engagement. So engagement is super important. The third principle is engagement. So there's different ways to engage people, to engage in different activities, things like that. But getting an organization, whether it's a business or a family or a group of friends or whatever that organization may be, implementing a major change takes time and effort, and people need to know why the change is being made, and to accept responsibility and say, hey, I need to play a role in this. I need to be responsible for this. Role playing or simulations can help with that, and I'll talk more about those in a minute. But the end question that should bring up for people, or they pose to people rather, is what does this mean for you? So people should be asking themselves, what does this mean for me? And then they can answer that and say, okay, what this means for me is blah, 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 blah. I need to make these changes, X, Y, and Z, to adapt to that, to make this change happen. Sometimes thinking things through can be difficult. Applying things and saying, okay, what does this mean for me? How can I make this happen? What do I need to do in response? Sometimes that's easy to figure out, sometimes not. Part of that's a mindset thing, but part of it is just a thought process thing. And so, again, going to share with you Magic Mind. Magic Mind is awesome. Magic Mind has a bunch of really great things in it. So the ones I wanted to mention today are lion's mane and cordyceps mushrooms. And those are nootropics that help boost your clarity of thought and your focus. So if you've got a problem you're trying to solve, or you're trying to adapt and figure out how something applies to you, that increased clarity and focus is going to be beneficial to you. I know that it's definitely been a benefit for me as I've used it. I've definitely seen an increased clarity in thought process, as well as having more mental alertness, ability to pay attention, less stress. It does so many great things for you. So I really recommend Magic Mind. If you're interested in trying it, you can go to magicmind.co, that's magicmind.co/LLPHP, and enter code LLPHP20 at checkout. And that code will get you 20% off your first purchase. So pretty cool there. 20% off is always a great thing. So like I mentioned earlier, I try to bring value to you. And so one of the ways I can do that is by offering you this discount code. So love to do that, love to help you out, bring things of value to you, whether it's information or coupon codes or whatever. So again, that's magicmind.co/LLPHP, then enter code LLPHP20 during checkout for 20% off your first purchase. The fourth principle that they shared is to learn from the future. And so this is where like role playing comes in, simulations, things like that. Part of why I share some of these articles with you is to know, because there are people, scientists out there, as well as other professionals, who are looking at different issues and saying, hey, this could happen. This is what's initially going to happen. These are the consequences. This is the ripple effect. And so the more we understand that, the better prepared we can be. When we get involved personally with scenarios or role playing, when we do, for example, drills like a fire drill, or we do a tabletop scenario with our family. If you're not familiar with tabletop scenarios, what those are is essentially you sit down and whoever's leading presents a scenario. You know, for example, we'll say it's 2:35 in the afternoon on a Friday, and the ground starts shaking and we're having an earthquake. And then asking questions, you know, asking each person, where are you going to be at that time on that day? You know, kids might be at school or on the way home from school, depending on their age. Adults may be at work. If you're working a night shift, maybe you're sleeping in bed at that time. And then kind of going through the scenario of, okay, this is where you are, this is what's going on, how do you respond? So those are tabletop scenarios, and they can be super useful. They don't have to be super complicated. Just talking things through is a fine tabletop scenario, especially if you're taking it seriously. It's sometimes easy to take those things not so seriously and make a joke out of it. But more seriously, you can take things. When it comes to preparedness, the better off you're going to be. Now, I talk about it being simple. You know, when you get into like our emergency management, like FEMA, Department of Defense, you know, emergency managers at the state and county level, you know, they'll do like full on drills. They'll have, for their tabletop scenarios, they will have maps and little models of things and little miniatures, and they'll move stuff around on the table, and it's almost like a game of Risk or something. We don't need to do that. If you want to, if you've got that ability or that desire, that's totally great. But just talking things through and thinking about it, it's a really good start. And it's totally, totally adequate. For most families and businesses, that will be totally adequate. Most businesses, that's probably going to meet any minimum requirements you have for your emergency preparedness practices, excuse me. So, you know, when you do a tabletop scenario or you're doing a drill, make sure you're varying those as far as what you're responding to, but also what the response scenario is. So maybe one time you're responding to a house fire that starts in the kitchen. Maybe the next time you do a drill or a tabletop exercise, you're practicing responding to a tornado. Time after that, you're responding to really nasty winter weather. And then maybe the next time you're back to a fire drill and a house fire scenario, but instead of the fire being in the kitchen, it's in the garage. And maybe the first time it was in, you know, while someone's cooking dinner at 5 o'clock in the early evening, and maybe the one that starts in the garage that you're talking about a couple months later, started because of the spontaneous combustion of some fuel that you had for your lawnmower or something like that. So different scenarios, you know, making changes, help you process and think things through, and help you to make those opportunities more effective for you and more educational, really, for your family. You can do those things on your own, kind of think through, okay, how would I respond in this situation? But when you have a family or a business, they're even more important, especially if you have children or younger, newer employees, that sort of thing. Scenarios tend to work best when they challenge people's thinking and cause them to kind of stretch and think outside the box. And so, you know, encourage creativity. Creativity is an awesome thing for so many things. And then, of course, the leader, whether that's the business owner or the parent, needs to be aware of what's going on, kind of see like, okay, these are our strengths, these are our weaknesses, these are things that are working well, not working well, and identify ways to improve and then things to encourage. So it's a way of looking forward to things and not back. So we got looking back with the historical stuff, like what happened with the example I gave with the Fukushima earthquake. And you've got tabletop scenarios and drills that are forward looking. And so we're really covering in the present, you're covering the future, the past, and you're taking all that together, meshing it, blending it, and finding what's going to work for you and be the most beneficial for you in your situation, whether that's for your small business or your family, or whomever. Again, those principles are learning from experience, paying attention to anomalies, engaging your group, and learning from the future. So hopefully these will help you in whatever situation and whatever environment or setting you're in, to be more prepared and to help those around you to be better prepared as well. It can help with supporting your mindset, building muscle memory, and all kinds of things that will help you be better prepared for when the unfortunate things do unfortunately happen. I appreciate you taking the time to be with me today. Again, I appreciate your time. I know it is valuable. And so I thank you for taking the opportunity to spend that time with me. If you have comments or suggestions for me, you can share those in the comments or email me at contact@llphp.org. Also, if you've enjoyed this, if you felt it's of value, please like, share, comment, those usual good things that people do. I would really appreciate you liking and sharing to help build this podcast, so I can reach more people and support more people, and empower more people. That's really what this is about. The Life Living Pursuit of Happiness Project is empowering people, helping people to grow and to learn so you can build your best life and protect it so that you can thrive when those unfortunate things happen, because they will. That's real of it. Bad things happen. It's part of life. Again, thank you. I hope you'll join me again next time. I leave you in love and liberty as always. Have a wonderful day.